Hello everyone, this is Ron from High Tech Legion, and we are going to take a look at the BIOS for the GIGABYTE G1 Sniper 2 Z68 motherboard. And since this is a GIGABYTE motherboard, it actually uses an award software BIOS. And here, the first one on the very top is the MB Intelligent Tweaker. Of course, motherboard. MB stands for motherboard. And here is where you will find most of the tweaking options that you can do for overclocking or setting voltages. And of course, when you first load it, you can see just a quick overview of the BIOS and base clock and CPU frequency, memory frequency, and total memory size. So you get the CPU temperature in there and some of the main voltages. The first one is the MIT current status. It basically is a live update of a status update of what your system is currently doing, and you have there, you can see we have two gigabyte DIMM memory modules that are installed, and how they're configured in terms of timing. As for the CPU, you can see that it's broken down into 4 cores. So we have a 2600K CPU and its current speed. You also see the memory frequency there and the multiplier that's set at, and also the CPU ID and update revision at the upper left hand corner. And this takes I need some more options to do in the back, but it actually takes a while to escape from this. I can't just escape by pressing escape once. Might take a bit because it's constantly updating, so it's a bit busy. And the next one is the advanced frequency setting. Now here is where you will set, or you can set, the CPU clock ratio multiplier. It looks complicated because everything is nested, but the GIGABYTE award software BIOS is actually very easy to use. And here is the advanced CPU features. Now I have these are actually the default values. I've loaded the default values, and I'm going to, while we're here, I'm going to show what you have done for the overclock. Of course, before you do an overclock, make sure you have a proper cooling, and I have a V6 Cooler Master CPU cooler, so it's you might hear it. You can hear the background. You can hear it's a very powerful fan. Has a push-pull configuration, and it should be more than enough to handle a very decent overclock on the G1 Sniper 2 Z68 motherboard. And the first thing I did, of course, was disable some of the features that will help stabilize the overclock. Of course, let's go to the advanced CPU core features in here, and these are actually, now remember, these are the default. By default, the C3 and C6 state and C1E have already been disabled, as well as the EIST. Now this is because if you recall and look at our unboxing of the G1 Sniper 2, it has that overclock button at the back, and also it has that overclock button on the front panel. Now what that does is it adds a +7 multiplier to the CPU frequency. So at the press of a button, so what GIGABYTE did was, by default, it has these C3, C6 state, and C1E disabled, so that that one button overclock will be possible. So see, we don't need to disable these functions here. I can leave the thermal monitor in auto. And of course, CPU core is enabled at all. And what I'm going to change here is let's refer to my notes and what I've done, because going through multiple motherboards, it gets confusing because the naming conventions can be different from depending on each on what motherboard you're using. For real-time ratio change in OS, I've set it to enabled. And the PLL voltage, see, if you enable this CPU PLL, it runs at a higher voltage, so I will actually disable this one. It's for overcurrent protection. I just leave it at auto. And for the PWM frequency, this is where because you need to push your, I wanted to push my CPU higher, I set the PWM frequency control to +42%. So yeah, the lowest one you can do is up to minus 24%. You can just leave it at auto, but for now I'm going to put it at plus 42%. And for the I'm just going to spoil it. Surprise! The CPU clock ratio I've reached was around 4.9 gigahertz, so 49. Now there's another thing that I've noticed is that the num lock isn't automatically turned on in this BIOS version, so I have to press num lock before I can. There we go. And to do that, and as you can see, it's already reflected there in the CPU. You can change it there, or you can change it in the nested advanced CPU core feature menu. Now I've left this disabled. Extreme memory profile. You can load just quickly show you. I have an XMP capable memory module here. I have the Corsair Vengeance 1600 megahertz. So by default it runs at 1333. Now if I apply the SPD multiplier, either you can do the multiplier here up to 2133, or do the internal clock, rather the profile. Much easier to do since you don't need to adjust the timings individually. But also you can see, I'll show later how to do that in the memory section. So let's just load that profile, disable that for now. And here, internal graphics clock. Of course, if you have a Z2600K, and the Sandy Bridge processors have their IGPs on the CPU package itself. And let's go back. Now, as I mentioned, the memory settings can be adjusted here as well. You have the memory profile, pretty much the same feature that we looked at. You can enable or disable that. See what happens if I hit profile. See the bottom changes. It loads that to the profile DDR voltage. It's 1.5 volt. Just disabled. Actually, it's the same, but well, it just basically tells you what it's reading. And you have the memory multiplier here if you don't want to set the using the XMP profile. Of course, you have the dividers to 2133 megahertz. Just cancel that, and performance. It's now standard, turbo, and extreme. Turbo is the default, and DRAM timing selectable. Quick and expert. Of course, the quick is the auto, just reads whatever's there. Or the expert, you have to so you can set the channel interleaving and rank interleaving. And for the timing, you can set the, see it says since we're on the basic mode, so you can't set the timing in there. But let's try again. Expert. Now these you can adjust individually now, and you can just leave it in auto, or much easier, I'll just load the profile. There we go. Have the 1600 megahertz setting in 1.5 volt, and the timings are already loaded, so no worries about that. Now, advanced voltages. Of course, the maximum safe for the CPU is actually 1.5 by specified by Intel. Let's try to max that. See, each of the step is actually 0.005 millivolt, or 0.05 millivolt, or 0.005 volt per step, and it will take a while till you reach your proper selection here to 1.5. So I would have hoped they could give you the ability to type it in much easier, but I guess this is safer just in case you make a mistake. And let's go down 1.5. Let's see how far it goes. I think it goes all the way to 1.7. There you go. It's 1.7 volts. Do 1.5 here, and QPI VTT, I think it's set to 1.15, but I think I left it on auto. It was pretty stable with that. Now, system agent is what in Sandy Bridge, what used to be called the Encore in previous Intel CPUs, for those who are unfamiliar with the new naming schemes. And I don't need to touch the graphics core in system agent. The CPU PLL, so you can adjust it here, auto, normal, or something, but leave that because I'm going to adjust that somewhere else. And now for the DRAM voltage, of course, you set it to 1.5. Although I already have the profile loaded, so I don't even need to touch that. It will automatically set that to 1.5. See the other voltages you can adjust here: DRAM VREF, DRAM termination, and each of the channel A, channel B data, and address VREF. And let's see, other multi-steps load line here is currently disabled, but see, it goes up to level 10 for just depending on how much you want to load it. But actually, for 24/7 overclock, I would recommend level 6, and change that to 1.5. And let's go back up one level. See miscellaneous settings. No, I don't need to disable that. So basically, you have the isochronous support and the VT support. And let's go back up and see there 100.31. You want to see it until you save it. So I'm going to do that, save, and then let's go back into the BIOS once again, and then go through the rest of the BIOS overview settings. Of course. Well, just in case it fails to boot, you'll see how well the GIGABYTE G1 Sniper 2 recovers from that. Although this is actually safe, I've overclocked and benchmarked using these settings already, so it shouldn't be an issue. There we go. We did fine. Let's see. Now it's set to 3.8. See if I set the overclock frequency correct. Because where I set it to 49. Okay. Maybe it reset when before I although my voltage is correct. Let me try that once again and make sure that it is 4.9 gigahertz. Okay, there's the beep, and power to the keyboard is on, so let's hit delete. There we go. And now, as you can see, it is 4.94915.74 megahertz. And see the CPU temperature is a lot higher now. It was 28 earlier, now it's 44. See the V core and the DRAM is in there. It's 1.5 and 1.536 because of the voltage adjustment that we've done from the level 6 LLC. And let's go back now to the standard CMOS features. Here you can set, of course, the date and time. You have the drives that are plugged in. IDE, you have see the drives there. And the advanced BIOS features. Here you can set the hard disk boot priority. I plugged in multiple drives so you can see what options will show. So I have a USB drive. I have a hard drive there and 2 other hard drives. Of course, if you have, for example, like this, you have 2 drives which are identical in model. So make sure you know which drive is on which channel, so you can easily figure it out in case you have a. For instance, I actually have a Windows OS installed on both drives, so I want to make sure that I boot on the right hard drive. And of course, quick boot, EFI, CD DVD boot option. If you put in your you have an EFI boot CD, you can put it in there and boot through there. You have the first boot device, select between hard drive, CD-ROM, all the way up to a LAN, and of course set it to hard disk, CD-ROM. Now remember, we haven't touched anything here except for the, so these are the default values. We will only touch the overclock settings. And here, password check. You can add it, and HDD smart capability is disabled by default. But if you wanna enable that, so you can report any read-write errors. CPU ID max to 3. And no execute memory protect, delay for hard drive, gives you time for the motherboard to detect the hard drive is plugged in, and the full screen logo shows enabled by default. Now this is actually the Gigabyte Sniper, although when we reset it, you didn't see it. If you actually, I think if you boot from a cold boot, you will see the G1 Sniper, rather the G1 Assassin logo, G1 Killer logo. Sorry, I'm getting confused with all the G1 names. The G1 Killer logo there with the skull biting the knife, and of course the display first. Now you have the option of selecting PCI onboard PCI-e or PCI-e X8, depending on what VJ is plugged in. Even PCI is the default, it will actually just read whatever is in there. So the onboard VGA, we have to do the auto, the default. Or it's going to use the, this is actually for the on-chip frame buffer size. You can set it all the way up to 64 is default, 32 is the minimum, and you can set it all the way up to 480 megabyte. And the see onboard VGA, since this is a Z68 system, it actually has a HDMI output. You can use, if you don't have a discrete video card, you can use the Intel graphics that are embedded. You have to set here, you can always enable it or disable if there's no external. There's no discrete GPU. So skip that. And the integrated peripherals, here's where you can have more options for the SATA and USB. You have the extreme hard drive, enable it here. There's a Gigabyte function, and you have the PCI SATA control mode. You can set whether you want IDE, RAID, or AHCI. Of course, if you're going to set, since this is a Z68 motherboard, if you want to set the Intel Rapid Storage Technology, or RST, you want to put it in RAID mode. For AHCI is if you do want to enable the hotspot function. Just plug in a hard drive, or just plug one out, unplug it rather, and you have the optional ROM and UI banner at the beginning. So these are all enabled. You have the SATA port 0 to 1 to 3 native mode, USB controllers, USB legacy function, onboard audio or onboard hardware LAN, and you can also get the, see there's two USB 3.0 chips here that you can enable and disable. One in the rear and one in the front. The rear is on the rear I/O, and the front is actually mid-board. You need to plug it in. As for the GSATA 3 controller, you can hear here, and also GSATA 3 control mode. You can set, once again, IDE, HCI, RAID, similar to how you can set the PCI SATA control mode. Above, notice the onboard serial port. You can set to which hierarchy you want it to, or just leave it auto or disable. Now the next one is the power management setup. Basically how you want your motherboard to react when you're a CPI suspend type. See here, you can set S1 or S3. So by power button, instant off or delay 4 seconds. PME event wake up. There, disable. Resume by alarm, disable. HPET support, enable disable, 32-bit mode or 64-bit mode for HPET mode. Power on by mouse, disabled. Power on my keyboard, disabled. These are all functions that are. So you can add a keyboard power on password if you set it to, if you turn it on. Of course, you also have the, let's go back to that. You have the AC backup function, soft full on or memory, and the ERP function. It's all for power saving. Just leave it on like that. And for the PC health status in here, so of course the reset case open status disabled, you can enable it. And you have the big gap right there. Just shows you a quick overview of the voltages and the system temperatures currently, as well as the fan speed. See, I don't have any fans plugged in. All the fans in the case are actually plugged into the 12 volt with a fan controller. So I'm not. I only have the CPU fan plugged in. As you can see, it's running at 1800 RPM, so it's pretty fast. So it's very audible right now. But you can adjust these here at the bottom. You have the CPU smart fan control. Set it to normal, silent, or manual, or just completely disable the smart fan controls. It's a 4-pin. All the fan headers are actually on the G1 Sniper 2 motherboard are all 4-pin PWM fan headers. That gives you a lot of options for cooling, and let's leave it at normal for now. Here you have the warning options for fan 3 and fan 1. So your case, and so the CPU fail warning, just in case if it dips when the fan stops or if it dips under a certain speed. You have the CPU temperature warning. You can set it from 60 degrees to 90 degrees. Of course, the Intel CPUs can handle all the way up to 100. The TGA Max, I think, was 100 Celsius. That's a good feature to have if you want your motherboard to notify you of that. And of course, we already looked at the failsafe defaults that we've loaded here. Now the optimized default, you have the supervisor password. You can set that, and also set user password. If you're going to have multiple users on your system, and you just want your regular users to have a regular user access, or the supervisor to have full access, like what we're seeing here. Of course, save and exit without saving is another option. Let's go back and save and exit, and let's try to boot to Windows and see our stable overclock. Might as well also check how long it will boot into Windows. Now there's the Gigabyte G1 killer screen I was talking about earlier. Note that I don't have Intel RST set up yet, so you're gonna see it's gonna run slower than what you would expect from a Z68 with an RST. The G1 Sniper 2 actually has the easy RST feature that is exclusive to Gigabyte motherboards, and we'll show that later in a video to show how easy it is to set that up on the G1 Sniper 2 motherboard.